There is belief, and then there is skepticism. And between those two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. But what if reality is far more complex than we've been willing to perceive? And what if the stories that we dismissed as myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to mysterious lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it the paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some search the stars for answers, while others look within. They are all connected, threads in the grand tapestry of life. But we stand at a place where the fabric between realities is much thinner than you might think, because this is Crossroads of the Veil.
The shadows crawl across the dusty floor. A chill I feel, I felt it all before. The house it breathes, a secret in the walls. Is anyone there who answers my calls? Tick tock, tick.
We did not merely lay the foundation of a house, we laid the foundation of a dynasty, believing stone could hold the weight of a dream. In those sunlit years, the house was not a structure, but a vessel, filled with the sound of your laughter and the light of our shared days.
Welcome to the place dedicated to the intersection of human history and the unexplained. We are researchers, historians, and analysts who know that ghost stories are more than campfire tales. They are fragments of memory, emotion, and trauma imprinted upon a location. Our mission is to decode those echoes. Tonight, we journey into the heart of the American Midwest to the Minnesota town of Hastings. Hastings sits cradled in the crook of two rivers, the Mississippi and the smaller, more intimate Vermillion. It's a town of handsome brick storefronts and proud Victorian homes, a place comfortable in its own history. But drive up Vermillion Street, and you will see something that doesn't belong, something both magnificent and mournful, a structure plucked from a European fairy tale and dropped onto the American prairie. Standing sentinel on Vermillion Street is a fortress of high aspiration. It doesn't sit on the landscape, it commands it, with steep soaring gables that claw at the sky, intricately carved trim like wooden lace, and imposing walls rising 50 feet into the Midwestern sky. It is a statement of intent. It is a vision of European romanticism, transplanted from the vine-clad banks of the Rhine to the windswept shores of the Vermillion. To see it on a gray autumn day, with bare branches scratching its windows, is to feel you've stumbled into a novel. This structure is one of the last, most complete examples of Gothic Revival residential architecture in the United States. It is a museum piece, a preserved artifact of a moment in American history when people believed a house could be more than a house. They believed it could be a moral compass. To encounter it is to confront profound contradictions, puzzles written in stone and wood. It is a grand, imposing mansion, with 15 rooms sprawling across its floors, yet its creators paradoxically conceived and named it a humble cottage. This wasn't false modesty, it was a philosophical statement, blending grandeur with a rustic, romantic ideal. It is a sophisticated symbol of Eastern refinement, a beacon of high culture with its library and formal parlor, built on the rugged edge of the American frontier, a place defined by mud-rutted roads and intimidating wilderness. Most compellingly, it was a family home whose public legacy is defined as much by its meticulously recorded history as by its potent, persistent legends. It is a place where the line between archives and anecdotes, between history and haunting, becomes impossibly blurred. The story is written in Gothic architecture, Gilded Age finance, and a house built to create the perfect family. This is the LeDuc historic estate, and for over a century it has been not just a home but a silent witness, bearing witness to one family's towering dreams, their joyous moments, and its crushing heartbreak. The energy of their lives became intertwined with the foundation of the house. We are here to assemble the pieces of that puzzle from the fragments of history and folklore. To understand the LeDuc family, you must first understand their dream. A dream of not just wealth, but meaning. A dream of building a legacy that would stand for centuries, a dynasty rooted in American soil but aspiring to nobility. The architects of this structure were William Gates LeDuc and his wife, Mary Bronson LeDuc. They were not just building a home, they were crafting a statement about who they were and who they intended to become. To understand William LeDuc, you must understand the promoter in 19th century America. He was a man of boundless energy and even more boundless optimism, a classic product of his time. William, an educated Ohio lawyer and tireless promoter, arrived in the Minnesota Territory in 1850. Imagine the scene. A young man stepping off a steamboat onto the muddy banks of St. Paul, a town that was little more than a collection of wooden shacks and hopeful storefronts. By his own account, he had less than $100 in his pocket, a sum that would barely cover a few weeks' board. But what he did have was infinitely more valuable. A head full of ambitious visions. He looked at the vast, unplowed prairies, the thick forests and the powerful rivers, and he saw an empire in the making. He saw railroads, cities, farms, and centers of culture, and he saw himself at the center of it all. He was a man defined by enterprise, a quintessential mover and shaker who wasted no time. He quickly established a law practice, a respectable profession that lent him stability. But his next move was more telling. He opened St. Paul's first bookstore. This was not a get-rich-quick scheme. You don't sell books on the frontier to make a fortune. This was a strategic move, a signal of his intent to build a cultured, literate society. He was planting a flag for refinement, education, and the arts. He was declaring that this new territory would not be a rough backwater. It would be a new Eden of civilization. He became, as one newspaper would later describe him, the state's first promoter, a man who saw Minnesota's potential and dedicated himself to selling that vision to the nation and the world. His greatest promotional coup, the event that cemented his reputation as a showman genius, came in 1853. William was appointed Minnesota's official commissioner to the World's Fair in New York City. This was his chance to put his territory on the map. He could have brought displays of timber, charts of crop yields, or samples of iron ore. But he knew facts and figures don't capture the imagination. You need a spectacle. You need a story. So, in a masterful stroke of showmanship that captured the Eastern press, he brought a live bison to the event. Let's picture this. New York City, 1853. The air is a chaotic soup of smells: coal smoke, horse manure, salt water, fresh bread. The noise is a constant roar, the clatter of iron-rimmed carriage wheels on cobblestones, shouts of street vendors, the bellow of a steamship's horn. Into this bewildering urban jungle walks William Gates LeDuc, dressed not in buckskin but in a respectable Eastern suit. And at the end of a thick rope, he is leading a living piece of the American wild, a full-grown American bison. The creature is immense, a mountain of shaggy fur and muscle, its massive head swinging low, its dark eyes taking in the terrifying forest of brick and brownstone. The effect was electric. Carriages screeched to a halt. Men in top hats stopped dead. Women gasped. A hush fell over the street, a rare moment of silent awe, before being replaced by excited chatter. What was this? Who was this man? This wasn't just an animal from a traveling menagerie. This was an ambassador from another world. LeDuc, with a confident smile, understood the power of this image. He was leading the massive animal through Manhattan's crowded streets, creating a sensation that garnered widespread attention for the distant territory. He wasn't just showing them an animal, he was showing them an idea. He was showing them the raw power, the immense scale, and the untamed spirit of Minnesota. The newspapers went wild. For a few days, William LeDuc and his bison were the talk of the town. He had put Minnesota on the map in a way no pamphlet or speech ever could. This was the man who would later build a house, and he would approach it with the same blend of grand vision and audacious showmanship. In 1862, after a decade of success and having established himself as a man of importance in the growing state, William and Mary began construction on their dream home in Hastings. This was to be the culmination of his efforts, the physical embodiment of the civilized dynasty he planned to create. The architectural design they selected was not chosen from a builder's catalog. It was a blueprint for a way of life, a philosophy carved in stone, A Cottage in the Rhine Style, from the influential pattern book Cottage Residences by Andrew Jackson Downing. To understand the LeDuc house, you must understand Downing. He was the 19th century equivalent of a lifestyle guru, a combination of architect, landscape designer, and moral philosopher. He was the era's foremost national tastemaker, and his books were the Bibles of taste for any ambitious American family. Downing promoted the picturesque aesthetic not as a style, but as a moral philosophy. He fervently believed that the physical environment a person lived in directly shaped their soul. A beautiful, well-designed house, he argued, would make you a better person. It was that simple and profound. He argued the home was a physical reflection of a family's moral character. A simple, boxy house suggested a simple mind. A gaudy, ornate house suggested a vain, shallow character. But the Gothic Revival style, with its steep roofs, pointed arches, and insistent verticality, was deemed the perfect embodiment of virtue. Every element of the design was intended to have a psychological effect. The tall, narrow windows and soaring gables were meant to draw the eye, and therefore the spirit, upward toward the heavens, toward piety and noble thoughts. The intricate, nature-inspired carvings were meant to foster an appreciation for God's creation. The asymmetrical layout was meant to encourage a more relaxed, harmonious family life, as opposed to the rigid formality of earlier styles. The house was meant to be a literal sermon in stone, actively cultivating the moral character of its occupants. Think of it as a spiritual gymnasium. By living within its walls, by experiencing its uplifting spaces daily, a family would be molded. They would be subconsciously trained in virtue, refinement, and piety. A well-designed Gothic Revival home was a structure that could actively cultivate the moral character of its inhabitants, making them better parents, children, and citizens. Downing's authority became so widely accepted that ambitious, educated families across the expanding nation adopted his philosophy. It was a way to prove you were not just wealthy, but good. The LeDucs, seeking to plant the flag of the high culture on the frontier, embraced this ideal completely. They were the target audience for Downing's philosophy, seeing in it a way to manifest their highest aspirations. But they didn't just copy the plan. Mary LeDuc, a woman of considerable intelligence and artistic sensibility, adapted Downing's modest cottage design. She took the core idea and magnified it, expanding the scale into an impressive 15-room mansion. Downing's humble cottage became in her hands a testament to the LeDuc's grand vision. It consisted of 52 windows, a large library to house William's books and serve as the intellectual heart of the home, and third-floor servants' quarters, all clear signifiers of the Gilded Age status they sought. The materials were chosen for their symbolic weight. They used locally quarried, buff-colored limestone, the stones of their new homeland. These walls were built 2 to 3 feet thick, lending the house an appearance of unshakable strength and permanence. This was not a temporary home. This was a fortress for a dynasty, intended to anchor the LeDuc family for centuries. The house was designed to outlast them, a permanent monument to their vision. The foundation was laid not just in stone and mortar, but in profound aspiration. It was a conscious attempt to manifest an ideal of refined prosperity on the unforgiving edge of the developing West. The house was not just a home, it was a character in their family's drama, a tool of social engineering they believed would guarantee their success. The LeDucs believed the house's design would make them the ideal family they aspired to be. It would shape their children, elevate their thoughts, and secure their place in society. This wasn't about showing off wealth, it was about manufacturing virtue. They were building a machine for creating the perfect American family. This magnificent architecture sets a stage for a level of success, piety, and harmony. But the family would also struggle and experience heartache. By building a sermon in stone, the LeDucs created a permanent physical benchmark against which their messy, complicated lives would be judged. Every time they walked its halls, they would be reminded of the ideal they were failing to achieve. The house, their greatest dream, would become a silent witness to their struggles.
The grand sermon we built in stone became our most magnificent burden. Its beautiful walls a constant, silent reminder of all we owed.
The dream of the Gothic masterpiece, the sermon in stone, immediately collided with a brutal reality. A classic Gilded Age paradox, where the performance of wealth masked profound financial turmoil. The image of prosperity they sought to project was built on shaky credit and spiraling costs. This immense, unending struggle forms the second, and perhaps most potent thread of the LeDuc haunting. It is the emotional fuel, the high-voltage current of anxiety and desperation that would charge the walls of the house for a century. Construction began in 1862, a year of grand hopes. The foundation was laid, the thick limestone walls began to rise, and the dream took physical shape. But their timing could not have been worse. The nation was tearing itself apart, and their ambitious project was almost immediately derailed by the Civil War. William LeDuc, a staunch Unionist, answered the call to serve. He joined the Union Army's Quartermaster Corps, leaving the project to flounder as he spent 3 grueling years immersed in the vital logistics of war. His war was not one of cavalry charges. It was a war fought with paper and ink, with train schedules and shipping manifests. It was a relentless battle of contracts, requisitions, and supply lines, a constant grinding struggle against bureaucracy, corruption, and red tape. The Quartermaster Corps was the circulatory system of the Union Army. Without it, soldiers could not march, fight, or eat. It was a role suited to LeDuc's talents for organization and promotion. He was a master of making things happen. His most celebrated achievement, the moment that defined his military career, came in October 1863 during the Chattanooga Campaign. A portion of the Union Army was trapped in Chattanooga, Tennessee, besieged by the Confederate Army. Their supply lines were cut, and the soldiers faced starvation. The situation was desperate. It was here that William LeDuc demonstrated his particular genius. He devised a daring and ingenious plan. He knew the Tennessee River flowed past the besieged army, but Confederates controlled the banks. LeDuc found a solution. Using a steamboat he had once owned a share in, a vessel he knew intimately, he loaded it with supplies. Under cover of darkness and at great risk, he navigated the boat through Confederate territory and delivered 40,000 rations of hardtack to the besieged troops. This mission became known as the Cracker Line. It was a lifeline. It saved that portion of the army, allowing them to hold out until reinforcements arrived. This decisive action was a logistical masterpiece, an example of LeDuc's ability to solve impossible problems. It earned him praise from his superiors and eventually the honorary rank of Brevet Brigadier General. He was now General LeDuc, a man of immense capability. Yet the logistical chaos of war he so expertly managed was ironically mirrored by the financial chaos consuming his home front. The cost of his dream home, which he managed remotely through a stream of anxious correspondence, spiraled uncontrollably. Every letter brought bad news. The price of lumber had risen. Stonemasons demanded higher wages. A shipment of materials was delayed. The initial optimistic budget of $5,000, a significant but manageable sum, ballooned to a staggering figure closer to $30,000. It was a financial overrun of catastrophic proportions, an error that would plunge the family into decades of crippling debt. The house meant to be the symbol of their prosperity had instead become the source of a crushing, long-lasting burden. It was a financial ball and chain that would haunt William LeDuc for the rest of his life. This financial strain manifested physically in the house's structure. It became a monument to compromise. The original architectural plan called for 7 grand fireplaces, each to be adorned with an imported marble mantel. Marble was the hallmark of a luxurious home in the Gilded Age. It spoke of wealth, European taste, and permanence. But the reality of their finances forced a painful compromise. The capable carpenter, Eric Coggeshall, who had taken over the project, had to find a cheaper solution. Instead of Italian marble, the mantels were carved from locally sourced pine wood. Coggeshall was a master craftsman, and he painted the pine to look like marble, a common trick of the era. But the LeDucs always knew. They knew that behind the convincing paint was simple pine. The compromise was built into the heart of their home, a daily reminder of the gap between aspiration and reality. The financial tension was most acutely felt by Mary, who was forced to make a difficult choice. With William at war and the house in constant construction, she moved back to Ohio with their children to live with family. Her letters from this period are a heartbreaking record of the painful calculus of frontier poverty. In one letter, she writes of an agonizing decision. Should she use their dwindling funds to buy much-needed shoes for her daughter Minnie, or send the money to Hastings to pay the stonemasons to keep the dream alive. It was a choice between her child's immediate comfort and the family's future. The house was not merely costly, it was a psychological burden, a monument to their perpetual struggle. When the family finally moved into the half-finished mansion in 1865, the war was over. The general, now a decorated and well-connected war hero, a man who had even intervened to save the life of a wounded officer, named Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. at Antietam, a man who would become a Supreme Court justice, returned to a home that was financially ruinous. He was a success in the eyes of the world, but within the walls of his own magnificent home, he was a failure. He had created a stage for a life of leisure and influence, but now had to spend every waking moment trying to pay for it. William LeDuc's entire post-war career can be seen as a frantic effort to generate the wealth the house demanded. He was like a man on a treadmill, pursuing grandiose, speculative Gilded Age ventures. Each one promised to be the one that would finally solve his problems. He invested in a Utah silver mine. It failed. He started a sawmill. It failed. His most ambitious plan was to launch a major railroad, the ultimate symbol of Gilded Age power. He was betrayed by his business partners, and it too collapsed, leaving him with more debt. Even his time in public service was marked by this pattern of ambitious but unsuccessful schemes. He was appointed by President Rutherford B. Hayes as U.S. Commissioner of Agriculture, but even there, he pursued unconventional, high-risk projects. He tried to establish a domestic tea farming industry in the American South. He championed producing sugar from sorghum and beets. These were forward-thinking ideas, but they were met with failure and public criticism. The man of constant motion, the brilliant promoter, the logistical genius, was perpetually haunted by the specter of his original massive debt. His post-war identity can be interpreted as a desperate 50-year performance to become the man his house claimed he was. The house was a promise he would struggle to fulfill. In a poignant counterpoint, the actual economic stability of the LeDuc household came not from William's grand enterprises, but from the quiet ingenuity of the women. The house that William's ambition had nearly bankrupted was saved by the practicality of his daughters. In 1888, his daughters Florence and Alice, seeing the family's precarious financial situation, established the Hastings Needlework Company. This successful cottage industry, run from the home, was a blend of artistry and commerce. It provided the critical, steady financial foundation that their father's failed speculations could not secure. It was a brilliant partnership. Alice, the artist, was the lead designer. She created over 1,200 unique embroidery patterns, drawing inspiration from the nature surrounding their home. Her designs were sold in magazines and through mail-order catalogs across the country. Florence, the more practical of the two, managed the accounts, handled orders, and ran the business side. From within the walls that represented their father's financial struggles, they built a thriving business. The architectural ideal of a home for leisure and high culture was ironically sustained not by the general's grand schemes, but by entrepreneurial labor of the women operating a business from the parlor and bedrooms. This persistent, generations-long financial and psychological strain, the constant worry, the public performance of wealth, the secret compromises, the failed ventures, the quiet success of the women propping up the patriarch's dream, formed an intense emotional residue within the house. It was a continuous field of anxiety, ambition, and disappointment. This residue would serve as the foundation and the emotional energy that would be given form and voice by the events to come. A house, no matter how grand, and a financial burden, no matter how heavy, do not on their own create a haunting. They create stress and unhappiness. To transform a landmark burdened by debt into a nexus of paranormal activity, another element is needed: a catalyst. The catalyst for the LeDuc estate was a profound personal tragedy, coupled with a deliberate, sincere spiritual experiment.
One day, the correspondence of a lifetime became a one-way street, and the silence that followed was more vast and empty than any room in our grand home.
For over 50 years, William and Mary LeDuc had been more than husband and wife. They were partners. Their relationship, documented in a lifetime of correspondence, was one of deep intellectual and emotional partnership. They had built a life, a family, and a magnificent, burdensome house together. Then in 1904, that partnership was shattered. Mary Elizabeth Bronson LeDuc died in the family home at 75. She passed away in her own bed, in the master bedroom of the house she had helped design and had managed for 4 decades. Tragically, William was away on business when she died. In an age before telephones, he was unable to return for her funeral. He never got to say goodbye. For a man whose relationship with his wife had been sustained through letters during long absences, the sudden permanent silence was an unbearable shock. The correspondence that had defined their relationship for half a century was now a one-way street. The silence of that loss was shattering.
I walked the halls we designed for two, a half-shadow tending to a museum of memories, forever keeping your empty chair just so.
In the years following this loss, William and his youngest daughter Alice, who never married and remained at home, became, in the words of historical records, heavily involved in spiritualism. To modern ears, this phrase can sound like a slide into eccentricity, a quaint delusion. But our analysis reveals their actions were a logical, culturally resonant reaction to the social and scientific upheavals of their era. To dismiss it as superstition is to misunderstand them and their time. The spiritualist movement, which had gained popularity since the Fox sisters in 1848, claimed to communicate with the spirit through mysterious rapping sounds, had become a national phenomenon by the late 19th century. It was not a fringe belief, it was a mainstream cultural force, attracting millions, including many of the era's most educated and prominent citizens. It promised comfort to a country still reeling from the staggering death toll of the Civil War. That war had denied hundreds of thousands of families a good death. Their sons, brothers, and husbands had died far from home, in anonymous fields or crowded hospitals, buried in unmarked graves. There was no closure. Spiritualism offered a radical solution. Tangible, verifiable proof that personal identity, the soul of a loved one, survived the death of the body. Crucially, spiritualism positioned itself not as a competing faith, but as a scientific religion. This was the age of scientific marvels, challenging traditional religious authority. Darwin's theories were reordering creation. The telegraph was sending messages, seemingly by magic, across vast distances. The telephone was capturing the human voice and sending it through a wire. In this context, spiritualism used the language of empiricism and technology to make its case. Séances were framed not as mystical rites, but as repeatable experiments. Mediums were not prophets, they were sensitive instruments. And communication with the spirit world was often called the spiritual telegraph, a perfect metaphor that blended new technology with ancient hope. It made the supernatural feel scientific, modern, and plausible. For an educated, enterprising man like William LeDuc, always interested in new technologies and grand ideas, this scientific approach to the afterlife held a powerful intellectual appeal. He was not a man to indulge in what he considered baseless superstition, but a new science that promised empirical proof of survival after death. That was something he could investigate. Their turn to spiritualism was not an act of desperation born of ignorance, but a logical, almost scientific experiment for people of their time, class, and intellectual inclination. They were applying a popular contemporary methodology to the most painful problem of their lives: grief. William and Alice's spiritual activities were not casual or clandestine. They were methodical and serious. They didn't just attend a séance, they conducted them. Historical records confirm they actively and repeatedly held formal séances in the mansion's parlor. Imagine this scene: the grand parlor, the formal heart of the home, where they had once entertained prominent guests. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn. William, an old man now, his posture still erect with military bearing, sits at the polished table. Across from him is Alice, his devoted companion. They are not seeking thrills. Their goal is explicit and profound: to contact Mary, to hear her voice, feel her presence, receive her reassurance, and restore the fractured family circle. Think back to the house's original purpose. It was built to be a perfect family sanctuary, a sermon in stone to foster domestic harmony. Mary's death had shattered that ideal. The house felt incomplete, the harmony broken. The séances, therefore, were a desperate attempt to restore that original wholeness. They were trying to use this new science to force reality to conform to the architectural script their home was built upon. If the house was a vessel for the perfect family, and a member of that family was gone, then they had to bring her back, at least in spirit, to make the house whole again. The results of their experiments were, by most accounts, disappointing. Reports suggest William achieved little success in contacting his beloved wife. He met with a frustrating, painful spiritual silence. But this failure did not shake his belief in spiritualism. His belief only deepened. For him, the system was sound. Perhaps the instrument, the medium, or their own receptive abilities was not sensitive enough. His subsequent actions confirmed the depth of his conviction. In 1906, he published a book detailing his purported conversations with the deceased spirits of Civil War generals, discussing history and military strategy. This publication shows how fully he had embraced this new reality. If he couldn't reach Mary, he could at least apply this new science to the other great passion of his life, his military career and his place in history. This sustained, documented history of ritual. The séances conducted within the estate by the grieving patriarch and his devoted daughter serves as the essential, verifiable, inciting incident for the paranormal narratives that define the house today. Whether one believes in ghosts is, for our analysis, irrelevant. What matters is that the LeDucs themselves believed. In their intense grief and desire for spiritual continuity, they performed the ceremonies. They focused their emotional energy, longing, and intention on opening a channel. In the language of folklore and paranormal theory, they primed the Gothic revival structure. They intentionally opened a door and created a permanent bridge between worlds. A bridge that, according to the enduring legend of the house, never fully closed. Since the LeDuc estate transitioned from a private home into a public historical site, first under its last private owner and then under the Dakota County Historical Society, its reputation as one of Minnesota's most haunted locations has intensified. The veil that William and Alice LeDuc allegedly tried to thin has, it seems, remained porous. The phenomena reported over decades are not wild, inconsistent rumors. They are chronicled by generations of museum staff, countless visitors, and numerous paranormal investigation groups, forming a detailed and remarkably consistent body of lore. Our systematic analysis of these claims reveals a crucial pattern. The hauntings are not random or chaotic. They are coherent. They are symbolic reenactments of the residents' core identities, their defining relationships, and their unresolved earthly conflicts. The paranormal activity at the LeDuc estate functions as a cohesive folk narrative, a living story preserving the essential psychological truths of the people who lived, dreamed, and struggled within its walls. The ghosts of the LeDuc estate are not terrifying monsters. They are echoes of personality, trapped in a loop of their own history. The lore, compiled from decades of reports, identifies at least 4 primary spectral presences. Each is tied to a specific history, a set of unresolved issues, and characteristic manifestations that act as their paranormal signature.
I remember the day I died. It was October 30th, 1917. I was 94 years old, an age that feels like an eternity when you're living it. I had seen so much. The Civil War, the booming railroad era, and the beginning of a new century. I passed away in the grand master bedroom of the Gothic revival mansion I built, the very room meant for my family's legacy. My final moments were steeped in the unresolved tensions of a long and complex life. The house, my cottage in the Rhine style, was meant to be a symbol of my prosperity, but its colossal construction costs had shackled my family to debt for decades. It wasn't a haven. It was a tireless engine demanding constant fuel. I spent my career in a whirlwind of ill-fated ventures, silver mines, sawmills, and ambitious railroad schemes, all in a desperate attempt to justify the mansion's imposing existence. But here's where the story pivots, into a realm of poetic justice and mystery. Shortly before my death, I received an immense and unexpected financial inheritance. This fortune came from the guilty conscience of the wife of a business partner who had betrayed me in a crucial railroad deal decades earlier. This 11th-hour windfall allowed me to settle my lifelong debts, clearing my name and conscience just as my life was reaching its terminus. One might think that would bring me peace. It did not. The business of my life was concluded, but the man, the general, the promoter, the worrier, could not stand down. A lifetime of anxiety does not evaporate with a final breath, and so I remained the master of this house, a commanding and perpetually restless entity. My spirit is bound here not by debt, but by the unceasing habit of oversight. My work may be done, but I cannot rest. My presence here is a pattern, a reflection of the life I led. First, and most often, I walk my rounds. The living hear them as phantom footsteps. They are not random sounds. They are mine. Heavy, firm, and authoritative. The echo of my military boots on the floorboards as I survey my domain. I trace the familiar paths through the upper halls, pacing between the master bedroom and my old office. I am forever inspecting, forever worrying, forever ensuring the property I fought so hard to possess remains in order. Second, I return to my work. In the quiet moments, those who now occupy my home hear the distinct, dry rustling of papers. That faint, crisp sound comes from the places where I conducted my affairs, my office, and the small study high in the central tower. That was my sanctuary, my command center. Though the ledgers are now balanced, I cannot stop shuffling the ghosts of documents, drafting spectral letters, and reviewing the endless, frustrating calculations that defined my life. I am the bureaucrat, forever trapped at my desk. Finally, there are the times I make myself known more directly. These are less common, but they are the most telling. On rare occasions, they see me, a misty, full-bodied apparition, a tall, stately figure with a military bearing, moving from room to room. My appearance is not meant to be terrifying. It is proprietary. I am merely the master of the house on inspection. More often, their modern contraptions pick up what their ears cannot. They call it electronic voice phenomena. They claim to capture a man's stern voice in whispers from the static. The irony is profound. In life, after my dear wife passed, I actively sought to use the spiritual telegraph to pierce the veil and communicate with the other side. Now, I am the ghostly message they seek. My own voice, the spectral communication I once longed to receive.
If my husband William's spirit is one of restless command, mine is reported as its opposite, a gentle, nurturing, and protective energy. I am the spectral matriarch whose quiet, loving influence counterbalances William's restless ambition. My manifestations are invariably meant to be comforting, helpful, and reassuring. My ghostly presence reflects my life as a woman of culture, refinement, and deep maternal care. My haunting is a narrative of enduring love and domestic fidelity. My spirit, it seems, remains to ensure the physical and emotional upkeep of the family sanctuary I helped create. My presence is most often felt not through sight or sound, but through the touch of my unseen hands. One of the most compelling claims associated with my house is the sensation of being gently touched or guided. I'll never forget the restoration worker on the main staircase, years after the house became a museum. I watched as the man slipped on a loose board and began to fall backward. He braced for injury, but I could not let him be harmed here. I reached out and placed my hands, firm but gentle, on his back, steadying him and guiding him safely to a seated position. He was shaken, but unharmed. This helpful haunting is simply a spectral reflection of my role as the nurturing caregiver and protector of my home. Staff and visitors also note the sudden appearance of odd, localized cold spots, particularly in the family-oriented areas. These are not general drafts, but distinct pockets of cold air I leave in my wake. While these phenomena can create a physical shiver, they are not meant to be menacing, but are the sudden manifestation of my gentle, pervasive spiritual presence. My energy is felt most strongly in the spaces I defined: the master bedroom where I died, the formal parlor where I entertained, and the main staircase that connected my family's life. I remain the anchor of the home, a quiet, loving presence making sure everything is still in its right place.
As the youngest daughter, my life was one of dual devotion. I was devoted to my artistry, pouring my soul into my work as the creative force behind the Hastings Needlework Company. But I was just as devoted to my father, acting as his aide, his companion, and his partner in our shared spiritual pursuit. It is fitting then that my spirit remains so intrinsically linked to his in the paranormal lore, a poignant spectral extension of our combined quest. My manifestations are more subtle than those of my parents. I am the transient shadow figure you might spot in your peripheral vision as you wander the mansion's halls. I am not a solid apparition, but a darker-than-dark shape that flits across a doorway or moves silently down a corridor before disappearing. Because I participated so deeply in the séances held alongside my father, it is believed my spiritual energy became intertwined with his. The rituals we performed to contact my mother, Mary, may have instead bound us together, our combined energy now manifesting as these vague visual anomalies. You can sense my presence most strongly in my former bedroom, where I created my designs, and in the parlor, the room where my father and I sat together, reaching across the veil. The lore suggests the rituals we performed succeeded, not in bringing my mother back, but in ensuring that we ourselves would remain attached to this house forever.
My name is Carol Bradford Simmons, and while I may be counted among the primary spirits of the LeDuc estate, I am not a LeDuc. My connection to this place comes not from blood, but from a profound love and a life's work dedicated to its preservation. I was its last private owner, the antique dealer who saved this house from ruin. My inclusion in the paranormal lore is crucial, for it shows that the haunting here is not just a family affair. It extends to anyone who has poured their heart and soul into these walls. I loved this house, filled it with beautiful things, and when my time came, I ensured its survival by donating it to the Minnesota Historical Society. I poured my very life into this home. Fittingly, you'll find me most often on the first floor, in the very rooms where I operated my antique shop for more than 45 years. The staff, especially those closing late at night, sometimes mention a faint lingering scent. They say it is unmistakably the aroma of pipe tobacco. I was indeed a devoted pipe smoker, and it seems the scent remains a sensory echo of my time here. Do not think of me as a restless or sad spirit. I'm content. I see myself as the eternal custodian, a gentle and proprietary presence still watching over the mansion I so deeply loved. I am here to ensure its history and its treasures are properly cared for. My presence is simply reinforcement of a truth. This house is the nexus, a place that holds on to the strong emotions and identities of all who have truly loved it.
The confluence of the house's architecture, its troubled history, and its paranormal lore culminates in a single, chilling, and symbolic question. A question raised by persistent reports of unexplained lights seen in the attic windows late at night. This phenomenon, reported by neighbors and passersby for years, is noteworthy because the attic is closed off to the public and reserved for storage. It is a space that should be dark. Our research into the home's original blueprints and family history uncovers the critical detail that the attic tower, the highest point of the Gothic revival structure, was not originally designed for storage. It once housed a small, intimate family chapel. This was the most sacred space in the house, the physical pinnacle of the building's upward-drawing moral design. This detail transforms reports of a simple light in the attic into something more meaningful. The sighting of unexplained lights in what was once the chapel tower window becomes a powerful, haunting, symbolic image. The entire sermon in stone was designed to draw the human spirit upward toward piety and heaven. If that is true, could the mysterious lights be the residual energy, or even the conscious spirits, of the LeDuc family, William, Mary, and Alice, congregating in the most vertical and sacred space? Could they be continuing their search for spiritual communion, for domestic harmony, for the wholeness they never achieved, long after their earthly pursuits have ended? The architecture itself seems to provide the final ghostly clue. Within the limestone walls of the LeDuc historic estate, a story is held not of failure, but of a family's profound bond. To understand this home, you must understand the family, and to understand them is to witness a life of joy and sorrow that transcended the veil of death. The family story is marked by an enduring loss. The sudden death of Mary, the matriarch, created a void that ambition and finance could never fill. Her absence prompted a desperate turn to the spiritual sciences as her husband William and daughter Alice sought a way to overcome their grief. They were not merely chasing shadows. They were pioneers of their time, using the science of their day to ask the greatest of human questions. What comes after death? Their methodical experiments in the parlor were a quest driven by love. an attempt to find a path back to the woman who was their anchor. While they may have failed to contact Mary in life, their shared intent may have achieved something greater. Perhaps their focused ritual thinned the veil, creating not a prison of unresolved sorrow, but a beacon for a future reunion. What if they simply decided to stay in the place that they loved, with each other? This possibility reframes the nature of the haunting. It is not the echo of unresolved lives trapped in a loop. Instead, it is the story of a family reunited. William is no longer a spectral bureaucrat trapped by the memory of debt. He is a husband returned, his restless energy now a watchfulness over the home he shares once more with his wife.
My last breath was not an ending, but simply the key turning in a familiar lock. I walked back through our front door and found you waiting.
Mary remains the loving, protective presence, the matriarchal anchor who drew her family back to her side, offering comfort against the world's chaos.
You were there, not as a memory, but as a presence. The house was whole again. The two of us its silent, watchful keepers.
Alice, ever the devoted daughter, remains loyal, her efforts in the spiritual sciences having ultimately succeeded in reuniting the family she cherished. Carol Simmons poured his heart and soul into the home. He remains an eternal custodian, a gentle presence still watching over the mansion he so deeply loved. The grand house itself is the vessel for this reunion. Its thick walls built to last for centuries, preserving not anxiety, but love. The LeDuc Historic Estate is more than a museum. It is the archival record of a family whose bond proved stronger than death itself. The architecture provided the stage they loved. Their enduring loss provided the emotional drive. The séances provided the path to their reunion. A living history where a family, finally free from the burdens of their mortal lives, remains together in their beloved home. The veil is thin in Hastings, Minnesota, not with sorrow, but with love.
The world outside our windows moves on, but within these thick limestone walls, time has ended. We have, at long last, achieved the permanence we always sought, together, in the home that holds our story.
Ting-ting, and goes the clock, a muffled sound, a hollow knock. Wind howls low, a chilling talk. Is anyone out there on my block? Subsonic rumble, world starts to crumble. Tick-tock, tick-tock, can't stop. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the clock. Shadows lengthen across the floor, creaking sounds behind the door. Footsteps echo more and more. Is this what I came here for? The drone, it vibrates deep. Secrets that the old house keep. Can't run, I can't retreat. Losing sleep, can't compete. Sonic rumble, world starts to crumble. Tick-tock, tick-tock, can't stop. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the clock. Shadows lengthen across the floor, creaking sounds behind the door. Footsteps echo more and more. Is this what I came here for? The drone, it vibrates deep. Secrets that the old house keep. Can't run, I can't retreat. Losing sleep, can't compete. Compete. The clock, the clock, the clock.
As we step back from the crossroads, remember, the story doesn't end here, because this is just the beginning. Searching for the knowledge and wisdom to unravel the mysteries of our universe. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected in the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.